we are going to unpack the core methodology of inclusive youth work. Specifically, how do we plan activities with accessibility built in right from the jump? Whether you're a youth worker, an educator, or just somebody who's passionate about building real communities across our diverse European realities, this is going to give you a totally fresh, practical lens for your everyday work. So picture this. You're sitting down to plan an activity. Naturally, your brain probably jumps straight to the logistics, right? You're thinking about the topic, the schedule, what materials you need to print out. But I want us to pause for a second. If our planning stops at logistics, who are we accidentally leaving out? Are we shutting out a young person who processes information visually instead of verbally? Or maybe a neurodivergent teen who gets completely overwhelmed by loud, unstructured group chats? In inclusive youth work, asking yourself who might be excluded by this plan is step one. It's the whole foundation. And that brings us to the absolute core of what we're talking about today. Accessibility is not an emergency solution. It is a planning habit. True inclusion means we aren't waiting around for someone to actively struggle, have a meltdown, or just sit quietly in the back corner before we finally say, oh, maybe we should adapt this space. No, we plan for diversity proactively. We have to expect our groups to be packed with different bodies, different minds, different communication styles, and varying energy levels. When accessibility becomes a habit, it's just baked in from the very start. So, how do we actually pull off this environmental shift? Well, we rely on a practical, heavily researched framework called Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. UDL was literally created so that spaces could be accessible to everyone right out of the gate, without that exhausting need to constantly retrofit things later on. It gives us multiple means of engagement, representation, and expression. In plain English, we stop assuming there's only one normal way to learn and participate, and we start designing flexible options from day one. In practice, UDL is actually incredibly straightforward. It's built on three simple pillars. First, provide different ways to engage. Figure out why a young person wants to join in and give them choices that actually spark their specific interests. Second, provide different ways to understand. Look, if you only give verbal instructions, you're instantly losing the visual learners or anyone who needs plain language or tactile examples. And third, provide different ways to express. Let young people show you what they've learned without forcing them to speak in front of a crowd. Let them draw, write, or even build something instead. Getting this from theory into the real world brings us to the accessibility planning checklist. Before any session kicks off, you've got to run through these checkpoints. Ask yourself, do we have clear objectives? Is the physical and emotional vibe of the room safe? Are instructions available visually, verbally, and in writing? What about the sensory load? That is a massive one. Think about harsh fluorescent lights or a super crowded, noisy room. Have we set up a quiet zone for sensory breaks? And finally, are there flexible roles so someone can choose to take notes or just observe instead of talking? Let's look at a quick before and after. A standard plan usually relies on verbal instructions, maybe a super long worksheet, forced group discussions where everyone has to present, and zero breaks. For so many young people across our diverse European communities, whether they're neurodivergent, dealing with social anxiety, or have a learning difference like dyslexia, that standard plan is basically a brick wall. But flip that to an accessibility-minded plan, suddenly instructions are visual and written, materials use images, kids can choose how they participate, there's a designated quiet break. Instantly, the anxiety in the room drops and engagement goes way, way up. Now, I hear this all the time. People think giving all these options and breaks somehow waters down the educational value. Absolutely not. The reality is, same goal, more access. The core objective of your activity hasn't changed one bit. We're still building life skills, creating social connections, and pushing critical thinking. The only thing that's changed is the access. By tweaking the environment, more young people can regulate their systems, grasp the task, and actually contribute in a meaningful way. And as we do this, we absolutely have to anchor everything in one vital disability rights principle: nothing about us without us. We cannot sit in a closed room guessing what young people need. They have to be active co-creators. We need to involve them in designing these spaces, setting community agreements, and figuring out what actually works. When youth across all our diverse European realities, from Roma youth to those with hidden or visible disabilities, are treated as real partners instead of just recipients of care, the whole dynamic shifts toward genuine empowerment. Ultimately, it all boils down to this. Accessibility isn't some special favor. It's not an add-on. It is simply what good professional youth work planning looks like. When accessibility is your default habit, Young people don't have to walk through your doors and immediately prove they're worthy of inclusion. They don't have to fight for basic accommodations while feeling like they're a burden. The space, the program, and you are just already prepared, waiting, and fully ready to welcome them exactly as they are. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Take a hard look at your own upcoming programs, your community spaces, your lesson plans. What is one barrier you can remove today? What's one flexible option you can add? What will you change before your very next activity begins so that every single young person has a real, undeniable opportunity to belong, contribute, and grow?